Once the kid reaches this age of 16 and a half, 17, 18, and beyond, they have a lot of experiencing that they have to do on their own. And it's actually very problematic to try and get in the way of that process, because we don't want kids saying, I desperately wanted to transition my whole teenage life, and because I'm so afraid of mom and dad's judgment, I can't do it. Because I promise a kid like that is going to be stuck in resentment, and they're probably going to get kind of emotionally and developmentally stuck in their teenage years and be unable to move on. And if that is your impulse to just talk them out of it with as much force as you can, I would warn you that the outcome of doing that could be really serious, and maybe for their emotional growth, maybe even worse than if they dabbled with a medical aspect of transition for a short period of time and changed their minds on their own. I'm concerned about that. And if that is your impulse, it might be a really interesting experiment, a thought experiment, to ask yourself, what was your relationship with your parents and their hopes for you, or their demands of you, when you were a young adult and a teenager? Because everybody has an individuation process to go through, where part of that is listening to your own instinct, even if it turns out to have been a bad one, in order to learn more about trusting yourself and about making up your own mind and going your own way. And even if you make a mistake and you regret it, you have just learned a tremendous amount about your own vulnerability and your own naivete, and the importance of being wise and being awake and being more vigilant about the choices you make, or how you treat your body, or what false promises you buy into easily, or how tempted you are by a simple looking solution. I mean, that is really the hallmark of one aspect of maturation, is being able to recognize our own ability to fall prey to these tempting ideas. And if you cannot do that for yourself, it isn't necessarily because your parents didn't teach you, it's because you have not yet touched danger, and you have not yet been woken up by the risk that you put yourself in. And I say this not to glamorize tragedy, but this is such an important part of how people grow up and become responsible. Responsibility is not just feeling indebted to others or to doing what your parents tell you to do. Responsibility is owning your own life and caring deeply about what happens to yourself. And sometimes we don't really gain that until we have made a harmful decision that we can feel the repercussions of. And this is, I guess, a very important aspect of how I understand detransition experiences. And from meeting the detransitioners that I have met, if they have experienced themselves as having been damaged, I honor that, because that's their experience of themselves. And what I also recognize is that many detransitioners have the wisdom and emotional maturity of someone much, much beyond their years because of what they've been through. It's a powerful lesson to be able to walk away with if a young person starts down a dangerous path and sees where they're headed and changes course. That's much more powerful than mom and dad saying, I won't pay for your college if you transition. I've just never seen that go well. On the other hand, I want to say there are some really valuable ways to encourage them to pump the brakes, right? I'm not recommending that you just say, I'm totally fine with you doing whatever you want, good luck. That's not my recommendation. My recommendation is to just be careful with the impulse to use anything you have in your power to desperately and out of a place of real urgency, just do whatever you can in an anxious way to stop your child from transitioning. I really like the following kind of framing, and there's something a bit counterintuitive here, but I know that the process of individuation becomes a little bit easier when kids feel like their autonomy is recognized. So here's what I would think about. This would require you to say it from a place of authenticity. If what I'm about to say would just be a line you got from the internet that doesn't speak to you in your experience, don't say it. But this is something to think about. If you are going to do your own exploratory work, this would be something interesting to think about. I recognize that you are an autonomous adult. You'd say this to your child as they are reaching and entering their adult years. I recognize that you have your own life to live and your own body to make sense of and your own identity to make sense of. And I recognize that and I respect that. I don't want you to be a kid forever. I want you to be an adult and make adult choices. I'm concerned about the idea of taking medical steps that have serious consequences. And I don't support the idea of you doing that until you can be independent and on your own, which would mean if you can support yourself financially and you are kind of a fully functioning independent adult. That doesn't mean that I'm telling you you're not allowed to, because as an adult, you're allowed to do whatever you feel is best. I'm telling you that that is not something I would think is a good idea. I don't support that. But I also recognize you're an adult and you have to figure some things out on your own, even if I don't agree with what you're doing. That's a powerful thing to say to a young person who feels trapped, because all of a sudden they've become less trapped. And trapped kids do desperate things. And kids who don't feel so trapped, sometimes that buys them a little more time and they have a little more room to think through and explore their options. And there's not necessarily a desperate rush to prove to mom and dad that this is real. A kid who feels persecuted is also kind of dangerous, so we don't want them to feel persecuted or always in a position of defending their identity.